Anyways, advocacy for the received text is not founded upon critical proofs of the corruption of manuscripts like the Papyri, Sinaiticus, or Vaticanus. When we take up the argumentation of a critic, we give ground to the critics. We receive the received text because it is the providentially vindicated text being received at the time of the Reformation, when all matters pertaining to the canon and its text were finally settled. Why do we reject all of those readings not in the received text? Because they are not received. In so doing, we follow Christ and the apostles, who received the text in their day without resort to critical inquiry. Canon is vindicated and authenticated by God, and the text is the very substance of canon. So, there's a lot of really important concepts here that I think are extremely important. First, advocacy for the received text is not founded upon critical proofs for the corruption of manuscripts like the Papyri, Sinaiticus, or Vaticanus. So I think what was being said there was that the primary argumentation is not to be found in what you find in King James only stuff, where the King James onlyists are constantly saying, well, do you know what Sinaiticus says at this verse? It's got a completely whacked out reading here, and so it's totally corrupted, and so on and so forth. So I think what it's saying is that's not, we're not saying don't use those texts because they're just bad. Our positive argument is a theological one about the nature of the received text, not necessarily about the nature of these other things. And then it says, when we take up the argumentation of a critic, we give ground to the critics. So it's hard not to read that as saying, well, I almost grabbed Sinaiticus down there, but it's just too heavy. It's hard not to read that as basically stating, if you start looking at variants in those manuscripts, then you got to start looking at variants in our manuscripts too. And we want to get away from looking at variants. We want to get away from weighing manuscripts. We want to get away from, well, everything, and this is my point, everything that Erasmus and Stephanus and Beza did to give us our text. The last time I talked about this, I didn't have this. And you guys, you know you're jealous. You know that this drives you insane. Because if you didn't see the last program where I showed you the Stephanus text. Yeah, this is the Stephanus text. If you didn't see it, I can hold it like this now. I'm not having to do this number because we had it recovered. Now, it looks even better than it did, and yet it looks like it did because Brother Jeffrey is a master craftsman at what he does. So Post-Tenebris Lux did this. It's 1550 Stephanus, but it now has a beautiful reinforced leather binding on it, antiqued. He even got the kind of leather that was recommended for older books and stuff like that. But here's the point. I wasn't able to show you this before, but in the columns, there are these little notations. You can just sort of see them generally. And what they refer to is a partial, not complete, collation of a series of manuscripts that Robert Estienne, at the time in Paris, was able to obtain. One of the fascinating realities is that the beta text, the indicated by the Greek letter, in Stephanus' 1550 edition, Beza used that exact edition in his textual choices for his later edition. That one right there. Could have used that one. We don't know. Who knows? But the beta manuscript in Stephanus is actually Codex Bezae Cantabrigiensis, Codex D in our modern Greek texts, which Beza himself was given later on. But Beza didn't know that. He didn't know that that's what Stephanus had access to. And so there were times when looking at a text, Beza would look at what Stephanus had, and then he'd look at Codex D, which we call D today. Oh, here's two manuscripts with the same unique reading. And that influenced his decisions. It wasn't two manuscripts. It was just one. He didn't know Stephanus had that. Just one of the very human realities of the origination of what would eventually become known as the received text. Now, the point is that the TR was created utilizing rudimentary textual critical principles. Erasmus used them. Stephanus, to a lesser extent, used them. Beza used them. Both were heavily influenced by the Latin Vulgate and by Latin readings. But the point is that whatever you want to call the received text, it came to us by the very critical process that Dr. Truelove is saying we need to avoid. We can't go there. When we take up the argumentation of a critic, we give ground to the critics. But if you're going to look at the Papyri, Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, then you have to look at every manuscript Erasmus had, every manuscript Beza had, every manuscript Robert Estienne had, because they produced the text. If you close your eyes to the one, you're not engaging in meaningful argumentation. That's someone in channel. Is that a print? Nope, that's the real thing. That's a 1550 Stephanus. They made real paper back then, folks. We don't make real paper. Honestly, seriously, you look at the gold edge. That's original. But look at the whiteness of the paper. I have seminary textbooks from the 1980s that are more yellowed than this is. And this is from 479 years. I think that's about right. 479 years ago? Yeah. There's no acid in that paper. And I can verify, I saw Al Mohler's 1550 Stephanus, and it was same thing. So it's not that we don't know how to do that. We do. It's just we're cheap. We don't do a lot of really nice book stuff anymore. It's a bummer. Anyways, I'm not even through this, and it's all right. Let me hurry up. I'm sorry. And Robert, can you see I'm not being mean, nasty, or super argumentative at the moment? I think I have accurately represented where you're coming from. I really have. So we receive the received text. Now I want you to listen to how many times the verb received is used here. We receive the received text because it is the providentially vindicated text being received at the time of the Reformation, when all matters pertaining to the canon and its text were finally settled. Now that is a mouthful. That's only one sentence. It's not even a paragraph. It's one sentence. That's a theological assertion. It is not a historical assertion. I think most of the reformers would be stunned by the assertion. They'd go, that was happening? We didn't know. Had no idea. For example, all matters pertaining to the canon and its text were finally settled. The canon and its text. You will not find a word in Erasmus, in Stephanus, or Beza that would substantiate anything like that. I think that is pure anachronism. That is reading back. That's wishful historical anachronism. I think that's what it is. I think the reformers would go, well, you're giving us a little more credit there than maybe you should. Later generations in fighting against Rome might be tempted to do like what happened in the early church, where when the Gnostics came along and professed their revelations and said, I got this from Peter, so on and so forth. You know, the error of many in the early church was to start to elevate apostolic traditions which weren't apostolic in origin. I think we can be honest in saying second, third, fourth generation reformers in fighting against the Jesuits made claims that they shouldn't have made regarding the reformers. It's a possibility. But this is there's just so much here. The providentially vindicated text being received. The church did not receive anything. She utilized a minimal number of manuscripts without meaningful analysis of their history, their date, their provenance. There was no committee for the reception of the providentially vindicated text. You can make it up. You can assert it. It just could never be defended, I think, in debate. And then when all matters pertaining to the canon's text were finally settled. So I guess they weren't settled up until the Reformation. I mean, that's highly problematic in and of itself. That raises a whole bunch of issues. But I've been going too long because I was showing off the text, actually. Why do we reject all of those readings not in the received text? So, at least that's a full admission. Any reading, which would include the fact that we have documented on this program errors in the TR. Fundamental, obvious errors that were made by Erasmus or by Beza. Just basic errors that here's the manuscript they were copying, but they missed this. Here's, Revelation 14:1. All right, so there's an error. And it was just in the production of the text, and there's a lot of errors in Revelation in particular. But there are others elsewhere. But basically this position is saying we accept them. We accept all those readings because something happened. Some providential event took place. We have decided, even though it would have been easier, I would think, to look at Nicaea or Chalcedon, you could even go to the medieval period. Look at, well, not quite medieval, but getting close to, look at Gottschalk. Well, in the days of Gottschalk, he was still holding firm, and so let's look at the text then. There's all sorts of places. Let's go to Wycliffe. I mean, wow, brilliant man. Look at how he influenced the English language. There's all sorts of places we could go. Once you just want to go, well, I see providence acting here, and therefore, boom. It was like when I debated Doug Wilson in our written book. I say, which one? And he said, that one, 1550 Stephanus. And it was like, why? Why not? We didn't get it. We didn't get a particular reason. Why not? Could have been the fourth edition of Erasmus. Could have been the second edition of Beza. It's just sort of like, boom. Which one was it? 1550 Stephanus. Oh, there you go. Well, all right. Because, so why do we reject all those readings not in the received text? Because they are not received. So, in Revelation 16, every generation of Christians from the start had read one way, but the TR reads another way. So, all those other generations of Christians, doesn't matter. They read it differently. Got a different word. Doesn't matter. Revelation 14:1. His name and his father's name. It's an important point. That's theological. Don't have to worry about those preceding generations. They hadn't received the text. That's very problematic from a historical perspective and a theological perspective. Really is. Really is. In so doing, this now it's get more problematic. In so doing, we follow Christ and the apostles, who received the text in their day without resort to critical inquiry. Talk about opening Pandora's box. Because any meaningful analysis of the New Testament's utilization of the Old Testament will demonstrate what we have discovered from archaeological and historical and text critical study as well, that there were a number of streams. You had what would become the Masoretic text, but there are variations within the Masoretic text. There are. What becomes the Masoretic text existed in the days of Jesus, but it's not necessarily it was quoted by the apostles. Now, Robert, no offense, but you've never debated a Muslim in a mosque in another country. You haven't. I don't think any of your guys have. I remember, it's funny, I was talking to my next door neighbor, and my next door, the next door house used to be his house many, many moons ago. And I remember very clearly the dividing line used to be recorded in the garage of that house, which was once an office. They were very surprised to discover that was once an office. They had no idea. Just a garage to them. It's like, nope, used to be an entire, had a noisy air conditioner and the whole 9 yards. You could hear it in the background of all the dividing lines we did. But I remember one night I was doing a radio program with, I'm not sure if Martin Tanner was hosting it, but Van Hale, the Mormon apologist. It was dark. I had my little green desk lamp on. I remember right where my desk was in the room. And that Mormon apologist threw at me the variant utilization of the Greek Septuagint over against the Masoretic text by the New Testament apostles as evidence of the corruption of the transmission of the text of the Bible. And I could tell he expected that to be pretty much the end of it, not realizing I went to Fuller Seminary and hence had already been hit with that stuff in a different context, but realized how important it was from an apologetic perspective years before that. These folks will raise these issues, and you simply can't stand there and go, I won't deal with that, because the received text has been received. Because, Robert, in the exact same context, let's use Mormonism there first. I can't tell you how many Mormons I've talked to who've used that reasoning, that specific reasoning, as a defense of the Book of Mormon. I have a testimony. There are millions of us that have testimony that the Book of Mormon comes from God. I'm just not going to subject it to any type of analysis. I'm not, if you raise archaeological issues, textual issues, the changes that have taken place in the text of the Book of Mormon, even since its publication, I'm not going there. And once you have taken the stance you can't go there either. Not consistently. But you go into the mosque with a well-trained Muslim, notice the difference there. There are a lot of Muslims who don't have any idea, but there are a lot that do. They're the ones that I debate. And they're going to go, well, wait a minute. If you want to criticize inconsistencies in the Quran, if you want to say that there is a development in Muhammad's theology in the Quran, and that's against our belief that the Quran has eternally existed and there's no part of Muhammad within it, so and so and so forth, then we're going to come back and we're going to point these things out to you. I can respond to that. What can you do? In fact, when I did the debate in London with Adnan Rashid, it became very clear. I talked about how the New Testament was transmitted over time freely over against the controlled transmission of the Quran. Adnan had not run into that before. And that gave me a tremendously strong position from which to demonstrate that his argumentation was inconsistent. But he was the one going, hey, as long as you get back to Uthman, that's good enough. That's good enough for me. And you'd have to say, hey, as long as you get back to the TR, that's good enough for you. And now you're in an impasse. So there's a lot packed into that sentence. And finally, real quickly, canon is vindicated and authenticated by God, and the text is the very substance of canon. So this is, I think, going to be a fundamental element of the text and canon conference, and that is the attempt to associate the presuppositional defense of canon with a TR-only view of the text. I think, again, this is a really bad misuse of Michael Kruger's argumentation. I think it confuses the fact that you can talk about the Gospel of John as the Gospel of John without talking about whether it is theos or huios at John 1:18. But this is saying, no, you cannot. And the only way to do that is the way they're doing it. In other words, a Byzantine priority approach can't do this, because there are variants within the Byzantine text as to what John is. No, you have to say it's the TR. Now I'm wondering, guys, are you going to do what Doug Wilson did? Is this going to be it? Is this the final one? Or are you going to go with the Trinitarian Bible Society? What are you going to go with? What? Because there's no middle ground here. You either have to say, and you said it, why do we reject how many? All of those readings not in the received text. So you have to have an identifiable received text. No ifs, ands, or buts. This is it. Everything else is a corruption. That's the only way to make it work. So the Byzantine priority guys can't go the direction you're going. Because, like in Revelation, the Byzantine text goes all over the place. It's split, the AK split, and there's splits in that. So you've got to go all the way. It still doesn't work, but that's the only way to do it.